Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today I'm gonna take apart my compressor and figure out what's wrong with it to see why it's been tripping breakers every time it airs up and it warms up. I've changed the capacitors on this a bunch of times already, and I'm probably on like my third run capacitor and then my second start capacitor. I'm gonna take it apart again today and see what's going on, so stay tuned. So before we start, here's the compressor I have. It's a 919-167311 30-gallon, maximum 6 horsepower. This thing was built in, looks like 2003. So a lot of these compressors from that era have the same issue that we're going to deal with or try to troubleshoot today. So before we start, I'll show you all the capacitors I've changed out in the past. So this one I actually changed probably a year ago, and I forgot if this was the run capacitor or the start capacitor, but it's the one that came with it. This is actually an original one. I've had this compressor for 16 years. I bought it back in like 2003, 2004, and it's been a workhorse ever since. About 10 years ago, it started acting up on me. It kept on tripping breakers. So I found out online back then that a lot of the causes of that is the capacitors. So the first capacitors I changed out were these guys. They were these 40 microfarad 370 volt AC capacitors. And this one, these were the replacement ones I bought. They were a little bit bigger than the one that actually came with the compressor, but they worked. So I had to rig them with like some wires. So when we take it apart, I'll show you what's in there. This Mallory capacitor is a 400 to 480 MFD. I think that's microfarad. It's something farad. There's 165 volts AC. So this must be the start capacitor because it's a lower voltage. And once it gets started, then it goes up to this guy, which is the run capacitor, which is a higher voltage once it gets running. Yeah, that's the original one, and I actually found a replacement for this one, a factory replacement, and that's the one I replaced it with back when that one went out. So we'll go ahead and take it apart and see how well those capacitors are doing now. So to start, we got to remove this cover. So it uses a little star bit. It's a T20 star bit. So we'll go ahead and take this out. So to take this off, you can see my little rig capacitor right here. So since this capacitor was a little bit bigger than the factory one, it wouldn't fit inside the cover. So I actually just drilled 2 holes back here. I zip tied it on, and then I extended the wires through a hole that I drilled back here to rig it so it fits on here. One of the things, there was a recall on this back cover on this compressor motor, and the replacement one actually had a bunch of vents through here. I missed that recall back when they had it, and then when I tried to order it, they didn't stock it anymore because it was obsolete. So I just kind of did my own thing. I drilled a bunch of holes in here, and I think I had to cut this for some other reason before when I was doing the capacitor, so the hole's already here. But yeah, I vented it so it would get better airflow through there. So the back cover is held on by 2 flathead screws. Pop this thing off. It's just a little tab that stays on top. My thing has been falling apart up here, so all this bunch of broken plastic pieces. We'll go ahead and remove the wires from here. You guys are worried about the potential on these capacitors, you can always just discharge them by shorting the two leads together up top. That drains the capacitors. So you just touch them both, and that would discharge the capacitors. So looking inside this thing, it's a pretty simple device. It's the motor, the capacitors that start the motor. So this is that replacement one I got for that other Mallory. It was a Packard one that I got a replacement with. So it's got the same exact specs. It fit perfectly in there like it's supposed to on this one. And this is where the other capacitor sat before, and yeah, you can see where it burnt out the first time right here with all the burn marks, and that's when it died the first time when I replaced it. And then I ran those wires through here, through that little hole that I created, and I had to extend those wires. The actual compressor itself is just this motor right here. It's got a little shaft, and provides cooling right here with these little fins. It brings air in, and then if you look in there, there's a piston right there that spins. This is what compresses the air, and this is really the air compressor part of it, where that piston spins and then it sends air down to here into the tank right there, and it goes into here. So this thing actually used to have a hard line between here and the switch, and that thing broke on me too, so I had to replace it with this little steel braided line here, which is just a line that I went down to Lowe's in the plumbing department. I just matched the threads and I replaced it for like $5 or something with this hose. So that's worked for like 10 or 12 years for me now. I've actually taken this apart before too to diagnose what was going on when it was tripping, just to make sure all the contacts in there were fine. I think that's working perfectly fine because I took it apart, greased it up, and made sure. But this is really the safety switch and the pressure switch, which is inside here. So we'll go ahead and keep on disassembling this and inspecting everything and seeing what's really wrong with this. So this thing also has a little safety switch in here too on the back of the cover. This thing actually presses against this part right here, which is the spinning shaft of the motor. If this thing down here breaks, or the cap breaks for some reason, this thing releases it and it stops the compressor. So my problem right now is not really that the compressor stops, it's that it trips the breaker in the house after it runs for a little bit, and that's the problem I've been trying to tackle or figure out for the longest time. Even after I replace these capacitors, it usually runs for a couple of weeks, couple months without really any issues. It'll charge up to like 150 psi. Just sitting around for a while, it'll start tripping breakers again. On a cold start, it'll run for like 5 minutes or so, and it'll trip the breakers. But once it warms up or gets hot, it'll start tripping the breakers more often. And usually I can't even get more than like 100 psi charge on it before it goes out. And I haven't charged up to 150 psi in a long time either with this. So I inspected all this, didn't really find anything loose or burnt or anything that might suggest that there's something wrong on this backside. I looked at this thing, I'm not sure what it is, but it's some kind of either a controller or a sensor for the motor or the winding or something. I'm gonna take apart the other side now, maybe take the head off of there and see if there's any issues with the compressor itself. So looking inside this thing, there's really nothing that looks too damaged. I mean, I see some scoring right here, but it's a pretty basic piston and cylinder design. I might just clean this up, maybe spray something in there to clean the walls up a little bit and clean this up over here, just because there's so much just dust and all this stuff that's built up over the years from the painting and all that that's kind of sucked in here. But I don't think that would really affect the operation of the motor or the drag on this, but I'll go ahead and try that. I'll take apart the pressure switch too and see if there's anything wrong with this thing. So it uses the same T20 torque as the other one did. So I've got the pressure safety switch out and everything looks fine in here. I looked at the contacts right here and it looks good. It flips up and down properly. There's no shorting or any kind of burns or anything on that spot. So the way this thing works is, this is the pressure switch right here. So when it hits, I think 150 psi, there's a pin in here that presses out and then stops, and it hits a contact right back here. It's kind of hard to see in this thing, but there's a contact that stops the voltage from flowing. On the back here, it's deep inside there. There's nothing wrong with that. And usually, like, yeah, if something's wrong with this, it would be shorting out and causing overcurrent, which trips your breaker. So I'm just gonna put back together properly on this because it is kind of loose right now. Hopefully, you know, just playing with it might help. So one thing I'm going to try for shits and giggles, I'm going to drill another hole, or I actually might just run 2 more wires through this existing hole into this capacitor. This capacitor's got double pins, so I can plug in the normal wires into it, and then I still have 2 other pins to plug in. So if you guys don't know, I think capacitors in series actually work together. So you could do 2 capacitors in series in case one doesn't have enough juice or it's broken, then the other one will do the work. So I'm going to go ahead and try that. So I put this thing back together, except that top bolt that where everything was crumbling, it actually started cracking the cover. So hopefully that doesn't affect the operation, because remember that little pin switch or that safety switch that needs to get released when the motor starts spinning. I'd seen some other guys online where they actually broke it too, but they just created a mount using an aluminum bar and a longer screw. So I might have to end up doing that, just cutting a piece of aluminum just wide enough to fit out here on the edge, and then you're getting a long screw and just putting it in there, so it creates a little sandwich bracket that keeps the back of the cover tight against the motor. Probably need a 2-inch screw to get it to fit. But anyways, I'm gonna try to start it up now, see what it does. Well, this is an empty tank right now, but usually when I've got air in the tank, it'll trip the breaker right when I hit it. Yep. Just tripped the breaker. So that didn't really fix it. I ran the compressor, it hit 85, 90 PSI, and it tripped the breaker again. So same old, same old. So I think something's fundamentally wrong with this motor. Unfortunately, trying to get a new motor, these Craftsman, it might be worth more just to go buy a Harbor Freight compressor with a new motor on it than it is to try to get one of these replacement motors for these Craftsman, because they're specialty motors. So with those specialty motors, it's really hard to get an affordable one. So I might end up getting a smaller Harbor Freight and maybe run this as a storage tank off of that, and that way have a lot of air capacity, but then just have the compressor, only cycle less because of the air capacity. I'm gonna try to see how far I can get it up now. So I ran it again, got up to another 20 or 30 PSI. So I'm at like 130 right now, and the breaker went off again. Yeah, it didn't really help redoing all this stuff. So I don't know. I might just need new capacitors. I don't know. I mean, that could be a solution too, but I don't want to get new capacitors all the time and just have them burn out. Hey guys, thanks for watching all the way to the end of this video. So that troubleshooting didn't go as I planned. I guess without replacing those capacitors with brand new ones, I can't necessarily rule out those being bad, but seeing as I just changed both of those a year ago, I doubt they went bad already. If you have a compressor that's not even running at all or starting at all, those 2 compressors are probably your biggest culprit. At least it'll get it started and it'll get into the condition of where mine is, where I can start it, it runs, it fills up, but it just overheats and trips the breakers. And I think right now it's an overheating issue. I can feel the heat coming off the motor right now after running it up to 140 PSI like I did just to test it. But yeah, once I get up there and it runs for a while, it does trip the breakers. I think if I let it cool down and I keep running it, as I let it cool down, it'll fill back up and it'll run a lot longer. It's not very reliable. If I had to paint something or I had to do something prolonged where I needed this thing to cycle, I wouldn't trust it. But for the occasional use that I use it for, it's perfectly fine. So anyways, if you guys found this video useful, which it might not be useful, but if you did, at least learning about the capacitors and taking the motor apart and figuring that out, then give the video a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, subscribe to the channel. I do a lot of DIY stuff around the house, on my cars. I've got a bunch of parted cars if you see any of my other videos. But anyways, thanks for watching guys, and I'll talk to you next time.